brief series called Do You See What I See? And it's a way in which, I guess, looking at a story that's pretty familiar to most of us. In fact, it's a very familiar story in the world in which we live, isn't it? The Christmas story. Apart from a few bits and pieces, you know, a few add-ins like Drummer Boys and that kind of stuff. It's all pretty well known. And next week we're going to look at that story, but we're going to look not so much at the what, but the why, and why it was that Jesus was sent. And hopefully you'll be part of that service. But do you see what I see? Because a lot of people look at this story and they see different things. Some people see the story as just a great story, like a story that they would watch and listen to, a story in which a million movies have been made about, and on we go. But I wonder if that's what we see, or do we see what the magnitude of this story tells us about not only God, but about who God is and what it is that God wants to do in this world. There was a very influential philosopher and thinker, a guy called Soren Kierkegaard, and he told a parable about the church. And he told it in a form that was kind of interesting, because he told it as the church was part of a church that was part of a village of ducks. And he said that each and every Sunday the congregation waddled into this duck church. And in that church they do what people do at church. They quacked out a few of the songs and readings and various things. And then the duck pastor, a heavy-set man, got up and a duck told them what it was that the Bible was saying. And part of his sermon, according to this parable, was that they would tell them that they could fly, that they were ducks, that God has given you wings, and these wings that God has given you are for you to fly in this world. And ducks with these wings you can mount up and soar like eagles, or ducks, you know. Ducks, there are no walls that can confine you, and there are no fences that can hold you. Ducks, you have these wings, and God has given you these wings so you can fly. And all the ducks quacked amen, because they weren't a Baptist duck church. And they marvelled at the duck preacher's words. And so in the story, the service finishes and everybody agrees that it was a worthwhile time. And then they all got up on their duck feet and they all waddled home. And that's a great parable of the church, isn't it? That we can come in atmospheres like this and remind ourselves that we are loved and we worship a God of infinite worth and power. And then we can all just get up and just waddle home. No offence, I waddle home as well as you do. And we sing these songs at this time of year with these amazing words, these amazing claims, really. Charles Wesley wrote this great Christmas song, and in it he says, Christ by highest heaven adored, Christ the everlasting Lord, late in time behold him come, offspring of a virgin's womb. And then this line, veiled in flesh, the Godhead see, hail incarnate deity, pleased as man, with man to dwell, Jesus our Emmanuel. Now, I'm sure Charles Wesley really enjoyed the fact that those words rhyme, but there's more to the rhyming of those words. There are amazing claims about this story that we're either familiar or not so familiar about. Veiled in flesh, the Godhead see, hail incarnate deity. So today, for a little bit, I want to just talk about one single concept or idea about this Christmas story. It's really just one single word that hopefully you can take away today and meditate upon a little bit this week and into the Christmas day and all that sort of stuff. It's really a word that makes all of the difference to our lives and our world and even our experience of life. It makes all the difference to how we're going to react to things, how we're going to navigate through life, how we're going to treat the obstacles in our way and the good times that come. It's really a word that's very powerful, and it's a pretty innocuous word if it's taken out of context, but it's a word nonetheless that we need to know at this time, and I think it's a key Christmas word. It's a word with prophetic promise made by a prophet 800 years before even the birth of Jesus, a guy called Isaiah. And he made this prophecy or promise. And in the Gospel of Matthew, it repeats the promise where it talks about Jesus. And they said, they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is translated God with us. And already you've seen the word that I want you to concentrate on today. And that word is the word, not any other words, his name or anything like that, but the word with. The young woman will be with child and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Emmanuel means God with us. I'm sure you know that. That little word with is the word, and here's why it's so important, because God with us changes everything. Not just God above us, not just God around us or God kind of near us, but God with us. Most of us have had the experience of living at times alone. And Christmas, as you don't need me to tell you, it can be an incredibly lonely time. I have the great privilege over the last couple of weeks to deliver a whole bunch, a couple of dozen actually, of COG vouchers. If you don't know what COG vouchers are, it's a ministry that started probably 10, 12 years ago, where we blessed mainly single-parent families in our local community with some help at Christmas. And we give them a voucher and they're able to buy some additional toys or food or whatever they want to do in that circumstance. And I get the opportunity to go into a couple of dozen houses who are not connected with our church apart from this, and to basically say, hey, there's a group of people who follow Jesus up there at Garrett Street, and I explain a bit about that, and we want to bless you with this at Christmas time. And as I've said before, they all promise to come to church and don't, and they receive, but that's not the requirement. And I tell them a little bit about Cap Money and what we do and how we might help and the op shop and stuff like that. And it's an unbelievable privilege that I get to do that as not only the pastor of this church, but as a person in this community. But I always tell them that this is because we believe the love of God informs us not just to sing songs, but to do something with those songs, that God is with us and he can be with you. Christmas can be an awfully lonely time for so many people. They long to be with people, with others, and with those who aren't here anymore. And already I know in your mind there's 2 or 3 or 5, 7 people that come to your mind to go, oh man, I'd just love one more Christmas with that person. It's a vital part of knowing the story of Jesus that God is with us. It's a powerful thing, and it changes the way we live. Have you ever realised that you haven't seen some movies that everyone else seems to have seen? I was having a discussion at a dinner a few weeks ago, and I had to confess that I'd never seen a Star Wars movie or a Star Trek movie. I'd never seen Home Alone, and the other one I mentioned in my wife's presence was I'd never ever seen the movie Forrest Gump. Has everybody seen the movie Forrest Gump? Oh, okay, right. I'm like this weird guy who's never seen it. Now, part of my relationship obligations are to watch and to enjoy movies that I've not yet seen. So last night, I watched, in preparation for this day, because I don't want to tell you any lies, I watched Forrest Gump. And it's an amazing movie. Isn't it an amazing movie? And it turns out that life is like a box of chocolates. Is that right? Yeah? I had no idea. But there's a scene at the beginning of the movie that kind of killed me emotionally. It's a story of a young Forrest, that's the young guy there. And he gets on a bus to go to school. I won't ruin the movie if you haven't seen it. But nobody wants to let Forrest sit next to him at all, because he's kind of, not a weird kid, but he's kind of a bit off, you know, he's not like the rest of the kids. And he goes down this bus and everybody moves across and says, no, the seat's taken, you can't sit with me. And you feel the pain of this kid who's got some challenges intellectually and physically, and he walks down the bus and these kids, because kids can be cruel in that circumstance sometimes, and they move across and shuffle across and won't let young Forrest sit down, and there's this rejection and exclusion until he comes to this young girl called Jenny, and she says to Forrest, you can sit with me. And so he sits down. No, I'm howling at this particular time into my non-alcoholic eggnog, that kind of stuff. I think, man. And Jenny becomes like this troubled angel, if there's such a thing, to Forrest, and I won't tell you the whole story. But there was such a difference that there was one person on that bus who said, "You can sit with me," and made the difference to this experience that he was having. Christmas, I think, is all about being with. In fact, life is, when you boil it down, all about being with. Being with friends and family and others. But for a lot of people who've gone through loss or a breakup or illness or depression or separation or whatever it might be, and maybe for reasons they don't know, Christmas is often the loneliest time of the year. It really is. It really is. A great theologian by the name of Elvis Presley said, "I'll have a blue Christmas without you." Some of the most influential thinkers, not Elvis so much, argued that loneliness is not just an inevitable part of the human condition, it's just what happens. Jean-Paul Sartre, the philosopher, once said that the reason that human beings are lonely is that we are living in a meaning-seeking creatures, but we live in this meaningless world. The biologist Richard Dawkins, one of the neo-atheists of past 10 years, said that human beings get lonely because the universe they live in offers no design, no purpose, no hope, just blind, pitiless indifference. Now, I don't think I want to have Jean or Richard around for Christmas because their worldview is that it's meaningless. Now, if that's your view, then that's the logical conclusion, isn't it? That we're alone in this universe. Well, for me, the story of Christmas claims that life doesn't have to be lived that way. In fact, God has acted to make it not that way. God actually hates loneliness. In the very first book of the Bible, in Genesis, it says that it's not a good thing for people to be alone. God makes all these things and says, that's great, that's good, that's wonderful, that's what I do. But one thing is not good is that people shouldn't be alone. And being with others in celebrating, yes, at this time of year and joining together, that's great. But it's a much greater with that God is with us. And pondering and treasuring that one word that God is with us is a tremendous thing. It's a big thing in the Bible that God has this desire to be with people. He doesn't have to. One Old Testament scholar counted 114 times in the Old Testament alone that God says to his people, "I will be with you. So don't be afraid, for I will be with you. Be courageous, for I will be with you. Have faith, I will be with you." And God makes that same promise to us. God with us through Emmanuel. I will be with you to hear your prayers. I will be with you to receive your worship, with you to give you guidance. I'll be with you through the storms and the calms of life. And then God says, I'm going to go down there and be with those people myself. There's a great verse in Galatians where it says that when the time had fully set or had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law. That's about the birth of Jesus. See, that's Jesus Christ, Emmanuel, God with us. With you, with me, with us, with them. That's Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh. That's Jesus, the wonderful Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. That's all about who Jesus is. That's Christmas, the coming of Christ, the Mass of Christ. That's why we still, 2,000 some years later, ponder and then treasure that God is with us. God causes his presence and all of his majesty and all of his mercy and all of his amazing grace into this one little child who grew up to be our Saviour. Last Sunday after church, I went to a lunch voluntarily for a family member, and in walked this couple who are kind of family members, but they'd had a child, or they'd had a child, 5 days before that event. So this 5-day-year-old baby came in. And it's been a long time since I held a baby, but a 5-day baby, and I got a turn to do that. I'd had a hazmat hat on and everything else, but I got a turn. And I got 4 kids, and I just, in that moment, had not forgotten, but I'd kind of fail to remember if that's the same, not the same as forgotten, how vulnerable and fragile and just how small this little baby is. God goes down to earth to be with people, and he chooses to do it in the vulnerability and humility of a little child. And I think that's one of the things that gets us in this story. So that word "with" becomes kind of the signature word of Jesus as he lives and grows and teaches throughout his ministry. At the beginning of his ministry, he takes a group of fishermen and tax collectors and the like, and he calls these people, and they choose to follow after him with his invitation, and they promise to be with him. There's that word again. Later on, we're told that the authorities in the book of Acts were so struck by the influence of Jesus being with them that they couldn't believe the kinds of things that they were willing to do. In fact, in the book of Acts 4 and 13, it says, when they saw the courage of Peter and John, who were one of those first disciples, and they realised that they were kind of unschooled and ordinary men, they were astonished and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. You see, there's something about God being with us and us being with God that astonishes the world. It astonishes the world. And Jesus is with beggars and with lepers and with foreigners and with people of ill repute, with enemy soldiers. One time they called Jesus the friend of sinners because he was hanging out with not the kind of people that a holy person should be hanging out with at all. It was intended as a put down or an insult, a diminishing of who he is. But to Jesus, this was like a title of honour, to be with them. That little word, to be with them. It's part of what got Jesus crucified on a Roman cross. And then 3 days later, after that event, he was resurrected. And in the Gospel of Matthew, in the very end, that little word "with" pops itself up again when Jesus makes the promise of, or the commission of those who would follow him. And he says right at the end of that commission, "And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." I am with you. And with that promise, that group of first disciples, we're told, turned the world upside down. And the difference wasn't their talent or their money or their position or their power. The difference was that Jesus was with them. And that same promise is for us too. In the New Testament, Jesus said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am with them." There I am with them. There used to kind of be a churchy excuse for a bad turnout. You know, we put on a service, there's only a few people here. Oh, well, where 2 or 3 are gathered, Jesus in the midst, you know, all that. Let's not do that. There is something amazing that happens when the people of God get together, because they're not just with each other, Jesus is with them. Jesus actually has a plan for loneliness and isolation and those without. His plan is that those who follow him would embrace anyone who needs to be loved. And folks, that would include everybody, even you. That'd be me, that'd be us, that'd be them. So, we worship God with us. So we have an option. Here's the option. We can hear all of that again for the whatever, how many years, and we can sing our last songs, or quack our last songs, and we can get up and all waddle home, or to wherever we're going for lunch, which will make us waddle a little more. Or perhaps we could take in that word "with" and celebrate that word "with," that God is with us, that God is with us. And whenever we're going through, and I know there's a bunch of families going through a whole bunch of stuff at the moment, that even though we even maybe walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we won't have to fear evil. And the difference is, for you, God, are with me, with us. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So let's live and love and give and receive. Let's minister and serve with gladness in our hearts and worship on our lips. So no matter whom we are with or without this Christmas, let's embrace this wonderful treasure that God, Emmanuel, is with us.